Okay, here's another kind of quadratic equation. If you remember from the last slide or the last video, y equals x squared plus 3 was the last one. And this, because it added to my basic quadratic equation, remember how I called this the basic quadratic equation? Well, what happened here was when I added 3, it moved it up by 3. But what happens when I multiply my x value? And I multiplied it by -2. Well, what we're going to do in this video is for every x value, we're going to plot it and then examine what happens to the basic quadratic equation, what changes. So I'm going to put in my x value and find the y. And we always start with x equals 0. This point here. What's y going to end up being? Well, I already wrote the answer, it's 0. But let's just solve it. Y equals -2 times 0 squared. Well, that ends up being equal to 0. So my first point is 0, 0. Whoops. Oh, well, when my x value is 1, y is actually equal to -2 times 1 squared. Well, that's equal to -2 times 1, which is equal to -2. So my next point will be 1 minus 2. My first point was 0, 0. My next point was 1, -2. Now, I know in the next slide I do when x equals 2, y equals -2 times 2 squared, which is equal to -2 times 4, which is equal to -8. So my next point will be 2 to the -8. Obviously I can't, it's probably going to be somewhere here, but obviously I can't draw it. Anyway, let's keep going and say when x is equal to 3, well, 3 squared is 9, times 2 is 18, and it's negative, etc., etc. We'll just solve for the rest of them. Now, I want you to notice that when it's -1, and you square -1, it's the same thing as if you squared 1. We're going to end up getting -2, and because I have a 2 there, -2 will be the same. It'll be -8, etc., etc. Where it's symmetric along these lines. Okay, just take note of that. Okay, the next step is to find first differences. Just like last time we found first differences. 32 minus -18, that's where the plus comes from the minus, is -14. And this first difference, remember, it defines our step pattern. We take -18 minus -8, or +8, is -10. And we have -8 plus 2 is 6. -2 minus 0 is -2, etc., etc. And we're just taking the first difference, the difference between these values, -2 minus -8 plus 8, etc., etc. You also want to notice that these values are the same. Now my step's going to be, if you notice, my first step last time was 1, 3, 5, 7, going up by 2. But in this case, my first step is 2. And my next step is 2, 4. You can't really see it here. Maybe we'll see it in the next slide. It's going to be 6. Let's look at our second difference. Let's take our second difference. -10 minus -14. Just subtract them. Is -4. -4. Remember, second differences for quadratic equations are always constant. And this tells me the size of our next step, the increase of the size of the next step. Okay, let's look at it here. Okay, our step pattern was -2, then -6. So my first step is -2. My next step is -1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I got that from here. My next step will be 10. And we see that it increases by a factor of -4. So my next step will be 14. And the step after that will be an increase of basically -4. So my next step would be -18. But anyway, we can't see it right here. And that would be how you draw this quadratic equation. Now, just a note, when you see a negative here, this negative flips the parabola. And if you want extra practice, just see what the following does. Y equals -x squared. And sub in your values. X, Y, sub in 0, 1, 2, 3, -1, -2, -3. Find your Y's and try and plot it. Find the first differences. And then second differences as well. And find your step pattern. And try and graph it. Additionally, on your own, I want you to find Y equals 2x squared. And you'll notice that it'll be the exact same parabola as this, same step pattern, except it will not be flipped. You can try this on Desmos, but really try and go over the first differences. And what you should notice about this specific graph, this one right here, is that my step pattern has now increased. Instead of taking 1 step, I'm now taking 2 steps. Instead of taking 3 steps, I'm now taking 6 steps. Instead of taking 5, I'm now taking 10 steps. We can see that from there. Okay, and what changes this step? Is this 2 right here. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you.